Ben Pyle is co-founder of Climate Debate UK. Afternoon to you, Ben. I mean, in many respects, Ben, everything's been answered there. You heard it from Jack. You know, the planet is doomed unless we do something about it, and it's in our interest anyway from a pragmatic perspective. So what's not to like?
Well, I think the last 20 years of energy policy, British energy policy and European energy policy, show us the reality of Jack's claims. And in what we see in Grant Shapps' comments today is pretty much the continuation of a government and indeed an entire political establishment, the whole of Parliament, that doesn't take energy very seriously, in fact, and puts green ideology far before the interests of the consumer, households, and our businesses. They talk a good game about the benefits that the green agenda is going to bring, and our independence. And our reduced dependence on foreign regimes, but where is it? As someone asked Stalin once in his response in his claim that you can't make an omelette without breaking eggs. Where's the omelette, right? Well, where is our self-dependence? Because this is not a new policy agenda. The Climate Change Act was made in 2008. That's 15 years ago. But all we've seen in that time is industries closing down, increasing dependence on China for manufacturing and materials, and the whole of the European continent increasing its dependence on Russia for oil, gas, and coal. This has been a 20-year agenda of self-harm. Essentially, it was Grant Shapps said that today that. Russia had weaponized energy. Well, if that's the case, if energy is a weapon, it was a weapon that was built in Europe, designed and built in Europe by Europe, and armed in Europe by Europe, and aimed at Europe by Europe, and then handed to Moscow on a plate. So I think we've got to look at the prologue to all of this, and that is a lot of policy failure.
But isn't that, Ben, what Shappsy is going to solve? He's going to address all of those issues. He's going to make it a less dependent on anything else kind of market. He mentioned nuclear, not in the sense of the big power stations, but a component to it. Turning to electricity, not gas. That will be more efficient. It will mean that we are doing less digging in areas like the North Sea and goodness knows where else. And although we're not massively dependent on Russian oil because of the global picture, it has affected us, and we can kind of, to coin a phrase, go it alone.
Well, a lot of those claims were based on what I would call science fiction. They're just promises. We heard about hydrogen, which you need an enormous surplus of power in the first place to produce. There's small modular reactors. We don't know how long that's going to take those to get through the policy regime to work out how they're going to be regulated. And we've got about the fifth or sixth promise of a great British insulation scheme. We've heard all of these promises before, and of course carbon capture and storage. Most famously in 2010 the government made available, I think, $1 billion or so to carbon capture and storage designs, to experimental designs in a competition, but people just pulled out. We need policy that's based on what is doable now. We're not in a climate emergency, we're in an energy emergency, and we need to bring the costs down so that our businesses can survive, never mind thrive, and that people can afford to heat their homes. So all of these promises are nothing new, and the reality is that there is very little the government can do, because all of Parliament in 2008 agreed essentially to outsource policy making through the Climate Change Act to the Climate Change Committee and various green blob organisations. So even if the government came up with a policy agenda that was realistic and that could provide us with cheap, affordable energy, as soon as they put those ideas into practice, the green organisations, the extremely well-funded green organisations that exist, would simply take the government to court and stop those plans through judicial review, or at least hold them up indefinitely. So the government actually has lost control of the policy agenda, and that was plain to most people who follow this stuff 10 years ago, and it's been running on fumes ever since. And the only reason that it's been able to survive at all in the public debate is because of the dominance of green organisations.
And just a point on this term net zero, is that I mean, it's beginning to feel like more like a catchphrase than a serious initiative. And I think most people have even lost sight of what it is. You know, I hear people quoting it, and then you say, well, what do you mean by that? And they say, well, I don't really know, but it seems like something I should be saying. Does it have any credible meaning?
Well, absolutely brilliant point, because we've known what the Climate Change Act commits us to for the duration for the last 15 years, but no government and no MPs and no other wonkish organisations or academics have actually really been able to spell out for us what our lives are going to look like when we wake up one day in 2050 and we have net zero lifestyles. But what we have been told, or what the Climate Change Committee have explained, is that 62%, I think, of our emissions reduction are going to come through behaviour change. They don't know how, because all the stuff like hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, it's all science fiction, as I explained. So all the pressure is going to be on regulating your lifestyle. They're going to have to impose restrictions on what you eat and how you travel, and all of this monitoring. And as we've seen today, you're going to be charged more for using gas and electricity. So it's all going to be pushing you towards greater expense. So this is going to have a huge economic effect. It's going to take away a lot of people's disposable income, and we're going to be the worse off for it. And we haven't tested these ideas, these principles. Ultimately, there's a very real possibility that climate change policy is going to be far more damaging to us in terms of our health and our wealth than climate change itself, and that goes even centuries into the future. So I think really we need to put a stop to all of this right now and say, okay, well, what are we prepared to accept by way of restrictions on our lifestyles? Let's test this principle democratically and say, well, maybe each household would accept a £200 or £300 reduction in wealth and income. We'd accept that cost for saving the planet, or we'd accept slightly less mobility. But none of this has been put to the public in that way. It's all been upsides. Oh, we're going to be self-dependent. Oh, we're going to have green jobs. Yeah. Oh, we're going to have a green economy, and then none of it materializes. The only thing that's enforceable is the targets. None of the promises have materialized, and nobody has been held to account for the failure of energy or green policy.
Ben, thank you. Very thorough stuff from Ben Pyle. I mean, you can part company with what he said if you wish, or compound and confirm everything that Ben Pyle had just said. Different view we heard previously from Jack Richardson. Ben, of course, the co-founder of Climate Debate UK.